Okay, there's one last subcortical region in your book we're going to talk about, and this is the cingulate cortex. So the cingulate cortex is this region I have highlighted here in yellow. You can see that it's not really a structure itself, it's a fold, it's part of the actual cortex. Now, the cingulate cortex is a giant C-shaped region. So if you think of cingulate and cortex starting with C's, you can remember it's this C-shaped region. And it happens to be above the midline of the brain, what we call the corpus callosum. Now, take a second, pause the video, and see if you can remember what the corpus callosum does. Cool, hopefully you remembered that the corpus callosum is kind of that fiber bridge that connects the two hemispheres. Now, as you can see here by the coloring, the cingulate could be split into two different parts, an anterior section and a posterior section. Now, I want you to take a guess again. Remember when we talked about those two words? Do you think the anterior section is the yellow one in front or the green one in back? So take a second and think about it. So as we talked about earlier, A comes before P, so anterior is in front of your brain. So anterior cingulate cortex represents this yellow region in front. Now, a little bit of a tougher question, but what do you think it does? We're gonna make a prediction again. The anterior cingulate cortex does a lot of different things, and let's see if we can sleuth and figure it out. Let's think about what it's near. So the ACC is right here in the frontal lobe. So think about what we know the frontal lobe does. And think about some of the subcortical structures it's near, some of the things we talked about in the cortex or some other structures nearby. Take a second, pause the video, and brainstorm what you think ACC might be involved in. Okay, so it's in the frontal lobe, which we talked about was involved in a lot of complex cognitive processing associated with things like decision-making. So decision-making is one key aspect of the ACC. Now, it's also nearby the amygdala, which is one of the frontmost subcortical structures. And the amygdala, like our friend Amy the almond, processes emotions. So once the amygdala assesses the emotional valence of an object, it reports to the ACC to figure out an appropriate course of action in the frontal lobe. And now the tail of the ACC, so right here in front, was right near that region that I highlighted earlier in teal, the nucleus accumbens, or AKA when Nicholas won his Benz. So this is right near the front bottom of the lobe where it is related to reward. So this is why ACC is related to the anticipation of reward, because it's near the nucleus accumbens. Okay, so that means the posterior cingulate cortex is this green section in back. It's in the posterior part of your brain, which we know is near this back, the occipital lobe. So again, I want you to pause this video and take a second and think about what it might do, given that it's near the occipital lobe and some other subcortical structures nearby. All right, so as we talked about earlier, the occipital lobe is all things primary visual. So things like color and lines and orientation and shapes. So the posterior cingulate cortex is involved in a bunch of visual processing. But in addition to that, it's right nearby this hippocampus right here. Remember seeing our hippo on campus? So it also assists in things memory related as well. All right, that rounds out our subcortical structures. We're going to move on to the peripheral nervous system.